Hey, fifth graders. Welcome back to another excerpt of Nowhere Boy. When we left off, they had made it to Germany and they were in Frankfurt. And it was interesting because Ahmed had said when he was there before, they were so welcoming. And Max was saying, geez, it's crazy because Germans during World War II were the bad guys. So they're now on their way to Vienna. And Ahmed's thinking about his dad, and Max starts to tell him the story. He realized he never told him the story about how of Albert Jonard because he thought it would be too depressing. And Ahmed is asking, how did you know to jump over the roof? And they were saved by history. Think of that, fifth graders, saved by history. So I'll reread that paragraph just to because it's been the weekend, and then I'll pick up with the rest. So Max realized that he'd never told Ahmed about Albert Jonard. The story had seemed too depressing, especially when he thought that the Nazis caught Ralph. But now he wanted Ahmed to know how history had saved them. The street was named for him after the war, Max explained. In 1942, as he launched into the story, the world outside vanished into the soft spring night. It was almost if they were being transported back in time, as if 3/4 of a century was no more than the blink of an eye. Chapter 55. Luck, Ahmed felt, was with them. With minutes to spare, they'd caught the last train of the night from Vienna to Budapest, and had even found seats together in the second car. In just 2.5 hours, they would arrive in the Hungarian capital. But now, as he sat next to Max, he knew that his luck had a name, Albert Jonard, and that it wasn't just luck, but kindness. He thought about the boy Ralph, who had lost both his parents, who'd had to start life over after the war. Ahmed knew he must have been racked by guilt and despair, just as Ahmed himself had been. Ahmed hoped Ralph had found peace, so he had to start over too, just like Ahmed. There was nothing to look at anymore. The world outside the illuminated train car was dark and seamless. Borders and boundaries were invisible now. Across them, Ahmed imagined, the flow of millions of feelings, of hope and longing and love. He thought of his mother, of Jasmine and Nori. Perhaps just death was just another border, a line his body couldn't cross, but that his heart kept slipping over. I love that, fifth graders. Let me read that again. He thought of his mother, of Jasmine and Nori. Perhaps death was just another border, a line his body couldn't cross, but that his heart kept slipping over. Wow, that is beautiful descriptive language, yes? Oh, that's really beautiful image. The train slowed down, distracting him from his thoughts. Max noticed as well, and looked up from his book. The border? Ahmed looked at his watch. It had been 45 minutes since the train had pulled out of the station in Vienna. He remembered that the Hungarian border was not very far. I think. The train pulled up to a deserted platform and idled there. What are we waiting for? Max whispered. I do not know. Ahmed shifted in his seat, his hands clammy. Must have been so tense for them. Last August, as he held Bana on his lap, stuffed onto a train full of refugees heading in the opposite direction, he'd sworn he would never step foot into Hungary ever again. He remembered how the police had pushed men carrying children, detained families for hours without water, and later thrown bags of food at their faces. The message had been clear, that they were pests, animals, not people. But then he thought about how his father had leapt into the sea to save him. Look, Max whispered, pointing out the window at a group of uniformed conductors walking down the platform. I think they're switching the crew. A few minutes later, there was an announcement in Hungarian and German. Ahmed understood neither language, only the German word willkommen, which meant welcome. He knew he wasn't welcome in Hungary, no matter what the conductor said, but at least he and Baba were finally in the same country. The train jerked forward. I guess that was just a normal stop, Max whispered. Yes, Ahmed agreed, but nothing seemed normal now that they were in Hungary. Every noise, every shadow, every station seemed to pose a threat. He's probably feeling like post-traumatic stress or something, like so nervous to be back in Hungary where he was not treated well. Max checked Ahmed's watch. I don't know how late the local trains run. We may have to stay in Budapest tonight, then take the first train to Kiskunhalas in the morning. The detention center is less than 3 kilometers from the train station, so we can just walk there. Ahmed shuddered at the memory of being marooned in Kaleti at the Budapest train station. There hadn't been enough trains for all the refugees, so they'd camped out on the platforms with hundreds of others. He remembered hearing that mothers were bathing their children in the bathroom sinks, and that smugglers offered taxi rides to the border in exchange for people's life savings. Risky. He remembered seeing the desperate crowd, even old people and pregnant women, rushing the trains when they arrived. But at least Ahmed had explored the station in his search for water and food and knew it well. I spent 2 days in this train station the last summer. I know places to hide up to morning. I can't imagine how scary that must have been and how chaotic and how frightening and trying to run for a spot on the train. I hate lines just when there's an ordinary line. Max smiled. I'm not worried. If there's anyone who's good at hiding, it's you. Ahmed found himself on the verge of laughter, the silly kind that strikes during a nervous time. This is my great talent. Don't sell yourself short, Max said. You're also good at running. Ha, Ahmed said. But before he could think up a better comeback, the door to their car opened. A conductor in a blue uniform and cap with a black purse slung over his shoulder strode in and started checking tickets. They already did this, Max whispered. In Austria, Ahmed whispered back. They must do it again in Hungary. As the conductor neared them, Ahmed shrank down in his seat and stared out the window. He didn't even look when Max handed the man their tickets, hoping the conductor would just peer at the tickets and ignore him, as the Austrian conductor had done. But he could hear the conductor address Max in Hungarian. English? He heard Max ask. Where are you coming from? The conductor said. Vienna. Alone, without parents? Ahmed didn't like the question, but it was nighttime now, and traveling alone seemed more suspicious. We're going on a scout exchange, Max said. You and my friend. Ahmed turned and smiled as pleasantly as he could. The conductor stared at him. You have ID? Without a word, Ahmed handed the conductor his Belgian ID. He barely glanced at it. Passport? He doesn't need a passport, Max said. He's traveling within the European Union. Are you his lawyer? The conductor snapped. Oh, no. No, but I have passport, Ahmed cut in, holding up the forgery. The conductor glanced at the eagle and shield emblazoned on the front, then waved it away. Is someone meeting you in Budapest? Yes, Max said, our scout leader. The conductor nodded and handed back their tickets, then continued down the aisle. He not like us, Ahmed whispered as soon as he was out of earshot. But he didn't stop us either, Max said. He just wanted to give us a hard time. Ahmed elbowed him to be quiet. The conductor was walking back past them to the front of the car. Ahmed noticed him glancing in their direction before the door shut behind him. I hope you are right. The train slowed down at a station. The door sprang open, and Ahmed had a sudden urge to grab Max's hand and run out. But this was the last train of the night, and he had no idea where they were. The doors closed and the train pulled away. Seconds ticked into minutes. The lights in the train flickered, then the ring of a mobile phone pierced the silence, startling Ahmed. An announcement crackled over the intercom. Some passengers started packing up their computers and fetching jackets and bags from the overhead rack. They were approaching the next station. The train slowed and people moved into the aisles, anticipating the stop. Ahmed watched them open the door and moved into the vestibule. All of a sudden, the line jammed and people backed up. Oh no, oh no. The conductor pushed past them through the door and pointed in Max and Ahmed's direction. Behind him, Ahmed saw the crimson beret of a Hungarian police officer. Oh no. Ahmed jumped to his feet and pushed Max into the aisle. Back, go back. Max gave a quick glance behind them, then turned around and ran. Ahmed grabbed their bags and raced after him. "Stop!" voices shouted. But Ahmed kept running. At the end of the car, he reached around Max and slammed his palm against the electric panel that opened the door. The door flew open and they scrambled into a packed vestibule. Ahmed's first thought was that they would be trapped here, but Max was small enough to slip through the gaps between people, and Ahmed elbowed his way after him. They sprinted into the next car, weaving around the passengers, blocking the aisles. Ahmed glanced behind him and saw that it wasn't so easy for the officer and conductor, who were larger and needed more room to pass. "How do we get off?" Max asked as they shoved their way across the next vestibule. "Station soon, just keep going." The train was continuing to slow down, but what if they reached the last car before the train reached the station? Ahmed glanced out the window. There was the beginning of a platform, yellow station lights, a long rectangular building that he guessed was a station. The train was creeping now. They could stay ahead of the police. They just needed a few more cars. But an overweight man completely blocked the next aisle. "Seats," Ahmed said. They vaulted over the empty seats on either side of the man, then continued to run. Ahmed could hear the police officer shouting, presumably for the man to move. The train inched forward. At any moment, it would stop and the doors would open. Outside, it was dark. They could find some place to hide. But just as he was thinking this, Max stopped short, and Ahmed nearly crashed into him. Ahmed didn't have to ask what the matter was. He just looked up. The door at the end of the car was marked with a large red circle with a white line cutting through the middle. It was an international symbol, one Ahmed knew well, one that seemed to symbolize his entire life. No entry. Oh no, they're completely trapped. What do you think? What do you think that's going to happen? Chapter 56. Max froze. They were cornered, trapped. But it was only in that panicked instant when he'd stopped moving, when he was standing absolutely still, that he realized the train wasn't moving anymore either. He spun around and pushed Ahmed back toward the vestibule. A blast of cold air gave him hope. He could tell that Ahmed felt it too. Ahmed grabbed Max's hand and they burst into the vestibule toward the open door. But just then the policeman ran in from the other car, shouting at the group of passengers waiting to disembark who stood between them. Frightened, the passengers moved in an uncoordinated way, some to the side, some backward, some toward the door. In the chaos, Max and Ahmed shoved past them and leapt out the door and onto the platform. Holding tight to Ahmed's hand, I love that they don't let go of each other, Max landed on his feet. His ankles throbbed with the shock of the concrete, but he immediately began running. They raced down a staircase, through an underpass, and into a station. Ahmed was running so fast that Max felt his arm being pulled in the socket. He worried it would either rip off or he would trip and his legs would fly out from under him. But the policeman's shouts behind them made him determined to keep up. Max hardly took note of the station or the staring faces as he tried to ignore the burning in his legs. The station wasn't large. A minute later, Ahmed rammed open a door and they were back outside. He paused just long enough for Max to take in a darkened square surrounded by gabled stone buildings before he pulled Max across the street toward it. They kept close to the silhouettes of trees as they ran, trying to stay away from the beam of the flashlight that was following them. Max was afraid they would be trapped again, but Ahmed pointed to an opening between two buildings. He pulled Max through it onto the sidewalk of the next block. Max hoped they might rest a moment, but Ahmed didn't even stop to check if the cop was still behind him. Dragging Max along, he raced past an enormous illuminated building with a clock tower and spires, a town hall perhaps, or a courthouse, but not a place to hide. "Park," Ahmed gasped. Looking up, Max realized where Ahmed was heading, a dark cluster of trees that seemed to stretch for several blocks. With his last remaining energy, he sprinted toward the park. Seconds later, they plunged into its shadows. Ahmed kept running, but Max tripped on the uneven ground. He landed on wet grass and lay there. Ahmed stood over him, but he didn't urge him up, and from the way his chest was heaving, Max could tell he didn't have it in him to run much further either. He crouched down and pointed to a clump of bushes. Behind, Then he pulled Max to his feet, and the two of them stumbled to the bushes and crawled beneath them. The only sound was their own labored breathing, so loud that Max was sure that anyone passing the bush would hear it. Every muscle in his body ached, and he realized as the wet grass soaked into his shirt that he had forgotten his coat in the train. Ahmed had noticed as well because he took off his jacket and spread it over both of them. A few minutes passed, then on the other side of the bush they heard voices, footsteps. The smell of cigarette smoke tickled Max's throat. Oh no, what if he coughs or sneezes? He tried to work up spit in his dry mouth to soothe the cough he felt building, but when he finally had enough to swallow, he heard a large, loud gulp in his eardrums and worried it echoed into the park. Gradually, the park became quiet. The clock tower bell tolled. What now, Max whispered. We stay here till morning, then get back on the train? Ahmed had closed his eyes, as if not seeing himself could make him more invisible, but now he opened them. Max was struck by how sad and defeated he looked. Hadn't they just escaped the police? No more train. You sure they'll be looking for us? Ahmed nodded. Maybe there's a bus. Ahmed frowned. Bus, train, taxi. Police look for us now on all. So what are we going to do? Walk back to Austria border. Try to cross on foot. What about your father? Max, they look for us now. Max scrambled up to his elbows. There's got to be a way to get there. Someone who could drive us. No smuggler. Max couldn't blame Ahmed for rejecting the idea after what had happened in Brussels. He fell silent, thinking. It was ridiculous to get this far and give up. He thought of Albert Jonart and Ralph. What would they have done? He had no idea. As far as Max knew, they'd never been in Hungary. But Ralph had been in a country where the authorities were hostile to him. And he'd survived. Not because he paid anyone to help him, but because even in the darkest times and places, there were always good people. People who would help others out of the kindness of their hearts. Isn't that what Mr. Rogers always says when there's a crisis and bad things are happening? Look for the helpers. There will always be people to help. So let me read that again because I just think that's beautiful and such a great message for the reader and for the great reminder for the world. But Ralph had been in a country where the authorities were hostile to him, and he'd survived, not because he paid anyone to help him, but because even in the darkest times and places, there were always good people. People who would help out others out of the kindness of their hearts. Max grabbed Ahmed's arm. I know what to do, but we need an internet connection. Oh, what do you think they're going to do? Just after chapter 57. Just after the hand of the seamaster struck one, a car pulled up next to the park and flashed its headlights 3 times. That's him, Max said. Ahmed jumped down from the bow of the wooden pirate ship they had stumbled upon in a playground. Oh, so they hid in a playground just like Ahmed had done in Brussels. It had been a perfect lookout, allowing them to see out to the street, but also to duck behind the hull when they heard voices or passers-by. He felt exposed as he crossed the sand, and he couldn't help but imagine Amir as he followed Max to the little white 2-door. But he told himself that this driver would be different. Max reached the car first and opened the passenger side door. Ahmed froze, startled by the person inside. The driver was not the man he had imagined, but a pretty young woman in a red coat, her shoulder-length dark hair streaked with blonde. Come in quick, she said in English. Ahmed and back. Max folded the seat forward and moved to the side. Ahmed climbed in. The car was warm inside, and a wool blanket was folded on the seat next to him. You can sit in front, the driver said to Max. You are less suspicious. Max folded the seat back up, climbed in, and closed the door. Ahmed wrapped the blanket around him. He wondered if he should lie down beneath it, so anyone looking into the car would see only 2 heads, Max's and the driver's. The woman swiveled around so she was facing them both. I'm Rika. Daniel says you're going to Kiskunhalas? Yes, Ahmed said, to find my father. It had been Max's idea to contact the refugee rights group that was helping Ahmed's father. After a short search, they'd found a hotel close to the park with a business center. Ahmed had waited outside, keeping watch for the police, while Max had played the part of the American tourist, greeting the night clerk in English and mentioning his parents upstairs as he'd sauntered in to use a computer. By messaging the emergency hotline of the refugee rights group, Max had been able to reach the coordinator, Daniel, who promised to send help. Max had already sent him a message back in Brussels, so their request didn't come as a complete surprise. Smart, right? Rika shifted the car into drive and pulled back onto the street. Kiskunhalas is about 2.5 hours away. When we get there, you can stay in a friend's flat. Thank you, Ahmed said. Flat at fifth graders is another word for apartment. Rika shrugged as if driving two underage fugitives through Hungary in the middle of the night was hardly a big deal. No one will bother us so late. You can rest, sleep. There were sandwiches and cokes in the bag at your feet. Ahmed's memories of Amir faded as he took a cheese sandwich and a coke out of the bag, then passed it to Max. He was hungry now, and he guessed Max felt the same. Relief reminded him of the empty stomach he had ignored. Rika played some English music on the car stereo, but when they were finished eating, she suddenly turned it off. I hope you don't mind my asking what's your plan? Ahmed was caught off guard, even though he knew he shouldn't have been. She had every right to ask. We were going to go to the center in the morning and ask if Ahmed could visit his father, Max said. In the rearview mirror, Ahmed noticed Rika smiling the way adults do when they think kids don't know how the world really works. Ahmed might once have smiled that way too, but Rika didn't know how many of Max's crazy schemes had actually worked. You know that Hungary closed its borders to refugees last fall and is arresting anyone who crosses into the country illegally? Illegally. What if they try to take Ahmed into custody, she asked. I have Belgian ID, Ahmed said. He didn't mention it was a fake, and neither did Max. That's worth something, Rika admitted, but how old are you boys? Rika laughed at their silence. Okay, you don't have to tell me. Again, I'm reminded of Number the Stars. But you're young enough that you can't just walk into the reception center at Kiskunhalas by yourselves without raising questions. You need an adult with you, if only to make sure they respect Ahmed's documents. Ahmed knew she was right. Getting to Kiskunhalas had been hard enough. Because of that, they hadn't quite thought through what they would do when they got there. Can you help us, he asked. I'm glad you asked, because the only way I will let you go there is with me. In the morning, we'll go together. The guards know me. I'll make sure they don't lock you up too. Ahmed grinned. Luck was with them after all. You are very kind. Max was right. Kindness of strangers. Thank you, Max added. But you need to promise me one thing. What? Ahmed asked. Max needs to call his parents and let them know where he is. Tonight. They know where I am, Max lied. In the rearview mirror, Ahmed could see Rika raise a skeptical eyebrow. They let you come here all by yourself? When Max spoke next, his voice was quiet but firm. I'll call them after Ahmed sees his father. I'm sure they're asleep now anyway. I doubt they're sleeping. I bet they're in panic mode. There's no way they're sleeping when they don't know where their kid is. Rika thought about this for a moment. Okay, but this is a promise. A peaceful silence filled the car. Ahmed curled up on the seat and drew the blanket up over him. In just a few hours, he would see his father again. He couldn't wait to touch him, smell him, feel the bristle of his beard against his cheek. The rumble of the car lulled him, his eyes closed. In his mind, he saw his father, asleep on a dormitory cot. Ahmed imagined he could whisper into his dreams. I'm almost there, Baba. I'm so close. Rika's voice roused him from the sleep he hadn't realized he'd fallen into. She was talking to Max in the front seat. The car was still moving, the only light on the dark road. Ahmed kept his eyes closed, listened. There are plenty of us who disagree with the government, she was saying, who are ashamed of the way they treat refugees, who want to help them. Ahmed smiled softly to himself. Max had been right not to give up. There Always people who cared. Yay. I'm going to read one more because I want to leave just 2 chapters for our last day. Chapter 58. Just after 9 a.m., Max stepped out of the car into the parking lot of the Kiskunhalas Detention Center. As he looked around, he was glad Rika was with them. A 5-foot-tall metal barrier topped with barbed wire stretched around the perimeter of the center. It walled off the parking lot from an oblong gray building. Metal bars covered the windows. Are you sure it's for refugees? Max said. It looks like a prison. Yes, and yes, Rika said. It's a prison for people who haven't committed a crime. So sad. They just want to be safe. Max glanced at Ahmed, but he barely seemed to have heard them. He was staring at the building, his eyes shining. And Max he realized he wasn't even really seeing it. He was seeing his father inside, as if love was a superpower that let him see through the walls. I can't imagine what he's feeling. They left the parking lot and walked around to the street side entrance. Hungarian and European Union flags hung side by side over the door, but Max also noticed a security camera monitored the entrance. Rika pressed a bell. A few seconds later, the door buzzed open, and Max and Ahmed followed her into a sparsely decorated waiting room that reminded Max of a doctor's office. A 2015 calendar still hung on the wall, and a stack of Hungarian sports magazines was piled on a side table. Sitting behind a desk was a skinny woman in a blue uniform with a matching cap. She spoke to Rika in Hungarian. Rika responded, her voice polite and calm. As the woman disappeared through a door in the back of the waiting area, Max wondered if she even spoke English. You might want to sit down, Rika said. This could take a while. Max plopped down on one of the hard plastic seats, Ahmed next to him. Max could tell he was anxious by the way he jiggled his leg. Daniel sent me your father's case file last night, Rika said. A few weeks ago, he crossed the Hungarian border from Serbia after a smuggler led him astray. Oh. That's so sad that people would take advantage of that and lead them in the wrong direction. So the border police arrested him. What is to happen to him? Ahmed asked. Hopefully we can make a case now for him to join you in Belgium. It's good you are registered there. Max and Ahmed exchanged a worried glance. At some point they would have to tell Rika the truth, but not before Ahmed had seen his father. The door in the back opened and Ahmed bolted from his seat. Max stood up as well, hoping to see Ahmed's father. Instead, 2 guards, guns swinging in their holsters, charged toward Ahmed. Oh no, oh no. Rika grabbed Ahmed by the arm and pulled him behind her. Max frantically turned to Rika. What's happening? Rika ignored him and spoke to the guards in Hungarian. One of them gave a curt reply while the other darted around her and grabbed Ahmed's arm. Oh no. Max knew whatever was happening couldn't be good because Rika began to shout. Max pulled at the guard's arm, trying to free Ahmed. Behind him, he heard the door open and someone else enter the room, but he didn't turn around for fear of losing his grip on the guard's arm. Ahmed stopped struggling and stared with disbelief. For a split second, Max thought Ahmed's father must have entered the room, but then he heard a familiar voice speaking English. Oh my gosh. Who do you think it is? Oh my gosh. Max, stop. Ahmed must go. Max spun around. Inspector Fontaine stood in the doorway, as out of place as in a nightmare. Max just stared at him, unable to speak. Only Rika seemed unfazed. I'm sorry, she said in English to Fontaine. I don't know who you are, but I just explained to them they can't take Ahmed into custody. He has a Belgian residency card. Inspector Fontaine smiled at her. It is a forgery. Believe me, I am Brussels police. Why are they so bent on going after a child instead of helping him? I don't get it. He's a child. Rika was looking at Ahmed now. But you registered in Belgium when you arrived? Ahmed glanced hopelessly at Max, then down at the floor. Rika's voice sounded more desperate. You must have opened a case file. No, Inspector Fontaine answered for him. He did not. He stayed in Belgium illegally with forged papers. Ooh, Inspector Fontaine, you're so cool. Look how tough guy going after a kid. Yeah. You must feel so big and strong. Sorry, rant over. He's not a terrorist, Max cut in. No matter what you think, you're wrong. He wouldn't hurt any. I know, Fontaine barked. Oh. Max stared at him in surprised silence. I made an error, Fontaine said gruffly, though perhaps if Ahmed hadn't fled like he was guilty, I would have figured this out sooner. I don't think he would have. The way he's presented, he hasn't presented as sympathetic to the refugees at all. So I'm wondering about this change. So he can go back to Belgium with his father, Max asked hopefully. Absolutely not. His father must stay here in Hungary, and this is where he too will register with the authorities. But that's not fair, Max shouted. What is not fair, Max, is how you have worried and frightened your family, not to mention broken the law. It is time I take you back to Brussels. Inspector Fontaine put his hand on Max's shoulder, but Max shrugged it off and ran to Ahmed. I'm not leaving you. He threw his arms around him, but Ahmed couldn't hug Max back. The guards were holding his arms. Max, he said softly, how they say in the soldier book, we are overnumbered. Outnumbered, Max managed to choke out. The next thing Max knew, he was bawling. He didn't even care that he was 13 years old, and everyone was watching. Oh, poor Max. Remember, guys, tears are a sign of great love. Please, Ahmed blinked and blinked. Don't cry. But this just made Max sob harder. Messy tears streaming down his face. Rika's voice trembled as she spoke to the guards in Hungarian. A second later, they sheepishly released Ahmed's arms, and Ahmed hugged Max back tight. Max, it is okay, Ahmed whispered. I will be good here. I failed you, Max whispered back. No, you bring me here. To a prison. To my father. I'm sorry. Ahmed started to pull back, but Max couldn't let go. I can't, he said between big gulps of air. Ahmed looked at him straight in the eye as if he knew more about Max than Max did himself. It's just for a moment. You take care of orchids, okay? Ahmed's heart is so big in a time like this, and he's thinking of another living thing, a plant. Then Ahmed let Max go. At the same time, Inspector Fontaine pulled Max away. Come, Max, we have a plane to catch in Budapest. We must go. This time, Max didn't fight. There was no point. He couldn't bring Ahmed back to Brussels, back to the School of Happiness. There was nothing he could do other than croak a final goodbye. Oh. And fifth graders, I'm going to stop there. I'll give you the next line of the next chapter, though. There was no time for Ahmed to think about what had just happened. All he knew was that he had to be brave, if only for Max. So we'll find out what happens next time, okay? Bye, my sweet kids. Don't forget to write in the shared doc.